Genshin Impact's landscape is littered with lore. This used to be a mountain until Venti decided he didn't like the snowy landscape and blew all the snow into the ocean. This is where Zhongli went spearfishing. This is where Raiden had a perfectly reasonable response to seeing a snake. And this is where Rukkhadevata built a wall, creating an apartheid state where the Eremites were forced to live in cruel conditions for millennia while her own people enjoyed lives of prosperity. Fun. But this right here, this has the craziest story of them all, and it's not at all obvious. So let's talk about it. Ever since the 4.0 special program, I have been dying to find out what the story is. Every land formation in Teyvat has lore, from the most innocuous of locations to places that had nails dropped from the heavens, annihilating entire civilizations for the crime of simply messing around and finding out. What makes it worse is that we know this is a big deal. They called it out in the live stream. It was one of the hardest challenges they had to overcome for Fontaine. For the devs to have worked so hard to make this and point it out, it has to have the most nutso story we've ever heard in game. But unfortunately, the game's not upfront at all with those answers. To get to the bottom of the mystery, I have played through every quest, read every item description, read every book, and listened to a mind-numbing amount of voice lines, none of which directly say what happened, but I have suffered for your sakes. I have become Red, destroyer of lore. And I believe I have finally pieced together the answer to the question of what is this big, dumb, stupid waterfall and why is it so important? Fair warning, the answer I found is straight loco. You are not going to believe me. So, because the nature of the answer is so unimaginably insane, this is not going to be a sane video. I'm just going to throw things out the way I talk about it casually. So, without further ado, here it is. Fontaine used to be Celestia. Wait, don't go anywhere. I can explain. So, if you played through the story quest, you probably encountered things about the ancient civilization of Remuria, right? Basically Teyvat's version of the Roman Empire, only it was destroyed by a flood. Now, Remuria, it wasn't just Fontaine. It was a great empire that spanned all across the colonized portions of Teyvat, otherwise known as the Unified Civilization. Those civilizations that were unified in the lore of Fontaine being the Remurians and the Barbarians. Think of it like the capital city of Rome and the Romans, and everyone else had demeaning monikers like Goths and Visigoths. All of them were part of the same empire even though they started as separate civilizations. But as different civilizations, they had different names for different things. The non-Remurians called the civilization the Unified Civilization, Remurians just called it Remuria. This isn't a uncommon thing in Genshin. Think how Khaenri'ah is Khaenri'ah most of the time, but in Sumeru, they call it Dari. I mean, they're different cultures. Of course, they're going to call it different things. Germany is Deutschland. Japan is Nihon. Spain is España. Hell, the Bullafruit was originally going to be called Sunsetia, but someone was like, name's already taken, and that's why Bullafruit is Bullafruit. That's great and all, but what does it mean? What it means is that everything we know about the lore so far has been talking about Remuria, just with different names. And now the things we didn't have names for have names. So let me break this down because Fontaine has basically solved so many of the mysteries of Teyvat's lore pre-Cataclysm. I'm just going to tell the story and put up the in-game sources. And hang on, things are about to get wild. Keep in mind, we're operating off the assumption that Remuria equals the Unified Civilization. Just because every story from every in-game culture about this period of time seems to be telling the same story does not necessarily make that assumption true. It'd be even more insane if they weren't the same civilization, but it's not impossible. Different cultures can have the same creation myths. It doesn't necessarily mean they're talking about the same event. So anyways, there's this dude. Some people call him the Primordial One, some people call him the First Throne, some the First Usurper. The Remurians call him God King Remus. Remus arrives in what is now Fontaine on an ark and sets it up on Mount Capitolum, basically Mount Olympus. He builds a golden city with a golden palace and a golden theater. He didn't like all the primordialness of the world, so he was like, let there be water, and turned the world into his personal Play-Doh. He's said to have the ultimate authority, which should be ringing all the alarms in your head if you've seen Ashikai's recent Vision video. If you haven't, do it, it's great. This is where we solve one of the greatest mysteries of Teyvat lore. Some of the lore says humans were always here, some say the Primordial One made humans. Well, now we know they're both true. The humans that were already here, they were the barbarians. The humans the Primordial One, Remus, created are the Golden Troupe. Everything's great for a while. Remus has his civilization go around everywhere and be like, this is Remuria now. All while living it up and partying with all kinds of music. Life's good, right? No. No, because this one dude is like, what if we mix the primordial water and the God King's water? And then he drinks it. And then he gets Remus to drink it. This is where we solve another mystery because this mixture drives them both insane. This primordial water is what we now know as forbidden knowledge, aka Abyss juice. So now, not only do we know primordial water is the Abyss, we know that Teyvat basically was the Abyss before Remus showed up. The Abyss is Teyvat's natural state. The cost of learning this is that Remus performed a literal purge on all the barbarians at Mount Capitolum. Then he took a nap. Let's rewind a bit though. Prior to the purge, we had two characters known as Boethus and Cassiodor. Cassiodor was part of the Golden Troupe, Boethus was a barbarian. But Boethus was so cool that the God King was like, yo, you're Golden Troupe, good job. This mirrors the real Boethus and Cassiodor, Boethius and Cassiodorus, who were Roman senators. Only Boethius was the one that was born in Rome in our world. But you know how I said Remus was like, good job? Well, it wasn't a good job, because Boethus is a jerk. He's the one that flex taped the two different waters together and then called for the purge. Now, in addition to those two, there was another member of the Golden Troupe called the Musician. They were all musicians, but this dude was special enough to be the musician. Unlike the rest of the Golden Troupe, he wasn't too happy about this purge, so he caused a great flood that wiped out Remuria. On top of that, the flood brought in the second usurper, the second who came, the second throne, give it up for Bane Dragon Skyla. Turns out that was really bad. And if you're thinking, wait, I know of a musician who raises sea levels, we're on the same wavelength. I know it sounds crazy, but it was probably Venti. No wonder he drinks so much, dude's responsible for literal war crimes. So great, massive war takes place, almost everyone is annihilated, the Golden City is reduced to ruins, and the barbarians decide to move into the wreckage. The remaining Golden Troupe does not like this, it's the greatest sin. Most of them are like, ew, people that are different than me, and they peace out. But a few stay behind, including Boethus. Boethus, to get his revenge, plants little capsules all across the aqueducts of the new society. Those capsules contain the same mixture he used to turn himself and Remus crazy, so when the new inhabitants are eventually exposed to the primordial waters after generations of absorbing it, they dissolve back into it. All of the Golden Capitolum, except for the Ark of Fortuna, but including Remus, sinks into the Abyss. Remus is overcome from guilt from the sin of having shared celestial knowledge with the people of Teyvat, so he's a sinner in the Abyss, so Mr. Sin Crystal from Caribear. The Fortuna didn't sink into the Abyss. You know how Celestia has ground underneath it and how Fontaine pre-Cataclysm used to be down here? Yeah, the Fortuna took off, leaving a giant crater behind where the people of bygone times, the barbarians, settled into to create Fontaine. Without Remus around, somebody needed to sustain the heavenly principles, so they started throwing down nails at everyone that committed the fateful sin of her former master, sharing celestial knowledge. Oh, and remember how Cassiodor is a native member of the Golden Troupe, and Boethus isn't? Cassiodor refers to Boethus as brother, and they kind of just piece out of the story after this, perhaps to other worlds, until some mad lad decides they want to call back the Golden Troupe? One native to Teyvat, one not? Still siblings? So now we have some of the Golden Troupe that left. These were the aristocrats. You know what's bothered me since the start of Fontaine? Decorabian's tower looks a lot like the ruined towers of Fontaine. Well, think about it. The Golden Troupe left. They wandered. You could say they became a wandering troupe, as in the wandering troupe that settled in Mondstadt and took over. Think that's a stretch? Alright, listen up. So you know this weapon? This is a Mondstadt weapon that was used by the wandering troupe. In Fontaine, we've got this doomsday clock that was based on the prophecy left by the Remurians, aka the Golden Troupe. That's right, the most hated weapon in the game depicts the doomsday clock. This thing is probably the most important weapon in the game lore-wise. At least now we know why it has an HP percent secondary stat. Fast forward to 500 years ago. Wait, fast forward to 500 years in the past. Anyway, Fontaine is down here. Down here, we've got some institutions. There's the Institute of Natural Philosophy, which, fun fact, is what we now know as science was once called, and the Nurse and Cruz Institute, an orphanage. We'll just call it Cruz Shelter. There's this dude, Guillotine. He sends his kids to Cruz Shelter so he can try to save Fontaine. His idea, create an anti-gravity machine that can lift Fontaine into the sky like Celestia to avoid the coming flood. Because, as we all know, that's not just looking up there and being like, please throw a nail at us. Now, you might think it was cruel of him to send his kids to Cruz Shelter, and you'd be right, it was awful, but at least they got to meet some other famous people. There's Jacob England, for instance. This guy. And also this guy. You see, he's different than other Fontainians. Instead of dissolving, he goes crazy and becomes an Inquisitor Baptist. So, part of an ancient race that didn't leave Fontaine and becomes corrupted by Abyss Jews. You know, the Golden Troupe. And he knows it. But he still doesn't have all the information. His plan is to turn everyone in the Fontaine into water to avoid the apocalypse and bring back the Golden Troupe to save everyone. But, you know, that was what the Golden Troupe prophesized. That's what they wanted. That is the apocalypse he was trying to avoid. Oh, and this is where he conducted his research. Why is that important? Elenus came out to play during the Cataclysm up here, and he died up here. Fontaine was down here. Wasn't underwater before, now it's underwater. So old Fontaine must have been flooded just before or during the Cataclysm. Egeria, former Hydroarchon, don't ask about her. Game doesn't want us to know much about her for some reason. She has to peace out to Sumeru to close the Abyss Rift. But everyone's panicking. They're all trying to find a way to stop the apocalypse. It's gonna happen, and something has to be done about it. I was racking my brain for the longest time trying to figure out why exactly Fontaine flooded just before Egeria left for Sumeru, and then I listened to this voice line for the Hydro Traveler.
I just thought of a great way to deal with Fontaine's prophesized curses! Okay, let's hear it. You know those great big clockwork mecha they use for digging tunnels? Well, why not send them deep underwater and get them to dig a load of drainage holes? Then no one will have to worry about the water level rising anymore. Sounds logical enough. But where do you think the water will go?
That's it. It was an emergency measure. Dig hole. Fill everything up with water, try to flush out the Abyss Jews. Once it's filtered out, cover up the hole. You can't stop all the Abyss Jews from coming in, so commission somebody to construct a device that brings all the water in the country together to filter out the Abyss Jews. Use the Gnosis to convert the Abyss Jews into a power source, store it, find as many excuses to use that source as possible so it doesn't overflow. Hope your successor can fix the problem later. Go become a puddle of water in Sumeru. All waters in Fontaine converge at the Fountain of Lucine, which is also where the Orichus is located. That's it, boom. Present day, the Orichus can't store any more Indenium. So the apocalypse can't be held back any longer. Now, before I go, there are a couple other interesting things I want to point out. It said all waters in Teyvat originate in Fontaine. Except for right here. This is a stream leading from Sumeru into Fontaine. Just so happens to be where Egeria became a puddle. So here's what I'm thinking. The Emertipole is flowing back into Fontaine, and that's what caused the water to rise over the place Linny and Lynette used to play. It's totally unrelated to the apocalypse. Egeria's corpse is just doing what every other in-game god that's passed on does, and it's just continuing to cause problems for everyone. Thanks, Egeria. The other interesting thing, Cruz Shelter. We know what happened to pretty much everyone else involved in the story except Lyris, the Red Empress, an Oceanid with a warm embrace that took care of the children. You know, Alice in Wonderland, the Red Empress, Red Queen, takes care of the children in the orphanage, If Arlecchino isn't Lyris, I'ma lose my mind. Also, look at those hands. That's what happened to this Hilitrol when Jacob, the Master, broke the curse Celestia put on him. So, like Warm Embrace, Pyrovision, Red Queen was an Oceanid. Think maybe the Oceanids were also the result of a celestial curse, and Arlecchino had hers lifted just like Cater's? I don't know. Crazier things have happened.